Trystie's Quest, or Kit, King of the Pigwidgeons. By Greville MacDonald. Chapter 5. Awful news about Parson Parsnip, a picnic under the beeches. Kit succeeds at last and follows his Pigwidgeons. Early every Saturday morning, when there was no school of course, Kit went with Jonas on to the downs, and nearly every evening after tea he went to the shepherd's cottage to try what he could do with the old black recorder. Every night before going to bed he took a slice of bread and butter up to the gable in the barn, and cut it into 13 square pieces of nearly equal size. He set one piece before each of his grotesque figures, having first cut the crusts off and eaten them himself because their teeth were not strong. Parson Parsnip always got the biggest piece, because he was the thinnest of all. On the top of old Cricketis, as he named the one who got the fall, he put the bull's eye which he had brought from Pixhaven. When, the next morning, he visited his queer little people, he always found the bread and butter gone, but the bull's eye was still there, though often a good distance away from where he had put it, and scratched all over. This way of showing the creatures that he really wanted to be kind to them was suggested, we feel sure, by the poor little family at Pixhaven. Kit hoped he would, by feeding the Pigwidgeons, succeed in turning their sour looks into smiles. Yet he had his doubts, because he felt sure they were wicked. You had only to look at them to see that even the parson would have been capable of any crime but for his white tie. The worst of them was Mr. Crickety. Besides being wicked, he was sulky rather than tired, for though Kit gave him the bull's-eye every night for his supper and you could see from the scratchy marks that he had tried his teeth on it, and must like it, he had always kicked it away from him before morning. All these particulars we found out from Trystie, who was now taken into Kit's confidence. You must not suppose that Kit made any secret of it. A child who has no fear does not often want to keep things secret from people he loves unless they're present, of course. But the bigger the business Kit had in hand, the less he wanted to talk about it, and both his mother and I thought it better not to question him about his affairs in the gable. He would tell us everything in good time, we knew. Indeed, he would often give us little bits of news concerning his progress, taking it for granted that we knew all about his creatures. We all understood what he wanted the slice of bread and butter for every night. Kit was going ahead finely with his pipe also, both in its construction and in getting music from it. He had at last actually made one that Jonas, to the child's joy, said might be wuss. The old man never gave any praise, though he was always helping and telling him to try again. Thus, when Kit first told him about the Pigwidgeon's supper and Mr. Cricketis' bull's eye, Jonas said only one contemptuous word: rat. But he added, rats it may be, but rats is all right. Go ahead, Master Kit, and feed 'em if you like. Howsomedever it's music they wants. But don't you go for to let 'em know you done it all, or they'll google your eyes out, parson or no parson. And don't you be afeard of the creaky cart behind you, but pipe away. A few days afterwards Kit had to face these possibilities, creaky cart and all, and he did it so bravely that I think, well, I mustn't tell what I think of my own boy. One evening, when Kit took the creatures their supper, he played to them really quite sweetly with his little pipe. I happened to hear it as I was passing the barn, and had stood to listen for some minutes. There was still a screechy note that would come into the tune and generally at the same place, and it set one's teeth on edge all the more that he was beginning to get some really bird-like notes and trillings. He went on playing till it was nearly dark, and came indoors looking very bright-eyed, but quite white and tired. The next morning, after his brief visit to the gable before school, he came running in great excitement to his mother and Trystie, who were both in the dairy. Parson's white tie is all cock-eye under his ear, he said breathlessly. His fell on his side doubled up, and his toes are squinting at each other, and Mr. Crickety has gone right across to him and he does look queer. And mother, the bull's eye's gone, so I know their wicked faces must smile soon. But they're all blue afraid of something, that's clear as bells. An expression of Jonas's. After dinner-time the mother and I had a talk about the boy, and we agreed that he was thinking too much about his absurd creatures. It was near midsummer then, the days long and sunny. So, chiefly for Kit's sake, we took the whole family, except the twins, up to our favorite beechwood on the top of the downs and had a tea picnic. The children did not often get us both together like this and were overjoyed. We built a fire, boiled our kettle, sang country songs, and set potatoes to roast in the hot ashes. I told them, for the 100th time or more, about the Fairy Queen, and how I and Trystie and Honeypot had visited her palace at the bottom of the sea. Honeypot is the only one of us who looks skeptical, although she still wears the necklet of shells she brought home with her. It won't come off, you know, but seems to grow bigger as her soft little neck gets fatter. Whenever I tell them fairy stories, Trystie is my best listener. She is a strange, most loving child, with a sort of happy shyness that you see in a robin as he picks up crumbs from the kitchen floor on a snowy morning. Trystie does not talk much, but she watches you so deeply, if you are one she loves, that you feel as if a dear elf, hidden in the branches of a hawthorn full of pink blossoms, were wanting to take care of you. She is always eager to be told anything, and as soon as she gets hold of any new fact, especially if about jiving creatures, she lifts up her head for a moment like a bird drinking water, as much as to say, "Now I understand." She never seems to forget anything. The children are always happy with her, and she is so clever with them that Kirsty, who this summer had gone home to her own people in Scotland for 3 months, was not seriously missed. So, when I say Trystie looks most like herself when I am telling fairy stories, you will guess what I mean. Children look most like themselves when they are happiest, least like themselves when selfish and unkind. It was time to go, for Honeypot was almost asleep in my arms. The 2 small boys were beginning to think more of the potatoes slowly roasting, and Robin was restless, saying he had toothache. Kit was lying very still with his head in his mother's lap, looking up into the green treetops. But the mother and I wanted to be alone and take a further walk on to our favorite hill overlooking the sea, the hilltop indeed, where first we had met one another. So now, after we had eaten the steaming potatoes, Trystie and Kit took the others home. It was only 1.5 miles, and downhill all the way, so that Princess Honeypot's pumpkin coach, as Kit called the go-kart I had made, the fiery steeds being of course fairy ones and invisible to everybody but Her Highness and the coachman, was no trouble. The children got home long before us. On their way, they could see Jonas's cottage from a distance. It stands at the edge of a beech copse that, starting from the end of his little garden, spreads out into a wide combe to which the downs drop almost precipitously on each side. Then it runs steeply uphill as it narrows, and the trees, which are very fine on the level, become so small and tangled up with brambles and blackthorn and raspberry bushes that it is impossible to get through. Winding down the chalky road, the children heard the recorder's sweet music long before the old man came into view. He was sitting on the wood-chopping block beneath his cherry tree, now full of red-black fruit. His knees were apart with his elbows resting on them, so that his back was bent and his head low down as he played his recorder to the little fluffy bobtail pup which sat before him with wondering eyes. As the children came near, he went into the cottage, but soon came back, wiping his eyes with a big red and green handkerchief. He had seen the children and stood waiting for them in the little porch. He still held the recorder in his rheumatic and knotted fingers. "Here, Master Kit," he called out, but with rather shaky words, "I've larned you and you've earned it. Take ye it home. But if you don't make no more progress, and if you don't treat it kind, it'll come back to me same as a bird, like. Don't be afeard, it'll stop along o' you so long's you want it. There be a powerful lot more in it than you'll fetch out for a month of years." Kit just leaped into the old man's arms, Trystie said. Jonas held him tight while the boy kissed him, then put him down and turned into the cottage without another word. We had thought Kit would be tired enough to go straight to bed. But he could not forget his creatures, and must first go to the gable platform, taking them their usual supper, though there was, of course, no bull's-eye to set upon Cricket's piece. He must also give them just one tune and see what they would do with the recorder's music. Perhaps it would comfort them and help them to behave nicely to one another. He found them all in their proper places. In the dim light, for the sun was gone down, they looked as if butter wouldn't melt in their mouths, as Jonas says when Curdy puts on his most innocent expression after some secret escapade. Kit set their suppers before them, spoke to them as though they were rather sickly children, wondered whether they were going to have the chicken pox or anything to account for their bad behavior, and then sat down to play his mother's good-night song to them. "Good night, pretty one, sweet happy night, with the fairies dance and run in the moonlight. Good night, sleepy head, sleep through the dark sleep until the morning red wakes up the lark." As he sat leaning against an upright supporting the roof, his legs stretched straight in front of him, he found his pipe going so sweetly that he hardly touched the tabber. But the absurdity of piping pretty words to these creatures seems to have struck him, for he then sang a verse of his own made up on the spot. Good night, uglies all, topsy-turvy night. Tumble up, big and small, everyone a fright. The occasion, however, was too important for nonsense. So he began, in some excitement, I am sure, to play the old recorder. Kit's fingers immediately seemed to go of themselves, and he thought there must be a nightingale singing in the rafters with him. Soon he could not tell whether he or the bird were making most of the music. The moon rose and shone through the many-colored skylight. The shadows danced on the floor in colors as bright as if it were daylight. A puff of wind blew in from somewhere and raised a thin cloud of dust. Then through this dust shone two parallel rays of white light sloping down from the skylight to the floor, and, somehow or other, Kit saw bars across the two rays, so that they made a ladder going right up and through the jewel-like window. The gay-colored shadows now danced a real Morris dance, the shepherd's hay which Kit knew so well, but the ribbons on their sticks and the bells on their legs and the gay-colored kerchiefs which they waved, made it difficult to see what shapes the shadows were taking. Certainly they were little people, shepherd children all, he thought. Then he heard the tiniest sheep bells tinkling and a few gentle bars, and he was sure some of the dancers were frisky lambs, though our own were then all full grown. Still Kit piped, still he watched, and now he beat the time soft and loud on his tabor. Soon the most extraordinary thing of all happened. The floor was suddenly bright with moonlight. The skylight was lifted and the wind blew down, bringing with it the scent of lime blossoms, always sweetest in moonshine. The moonray ladder was clearer than ever, the dust blown away. The little people were dancing madly round and round the row of Kit's ugly figures, flicking them with their kerchiefs, and shaking their belled ankles in their faces. An outer ring of dancing lambs was keeping pace, frisking and pirouetting and barring with glee. Outside all, between his feet and the dancers, sat quite quietly on their haunches a pair of minute bob-tailed sheepdogs, looking wise enough to enjoy the children's fun, but too responsible to share it. One by one up stumbled the Swedes and carrots and potatoes, and, last of all, the parsnip. The dancers drove them one by one up the ladder and out at the skylight. The first to go was Mr. Crickety. The last was the Reverend Parson. He stopped on the first rung of the ladder to set his tie straight. On the second rung he turned round to make a gesticulation of protest against the fairy's unseemly frivolity, but his tie lost its balance again, the poor toes turned in to squint at themselves, his knees began to double under him, he slipped ignominiously with one rung of the ladder between his legs, and then tumbled on to the floor. The dancers, however, cared nothing for accidents and would not listen either to excuses or sermons. Up he had to get in double quick time, and though his white tie was now cutting half through his neck, he had to scamper up the ladder on all fours, and so after the other rascals. Up he stumbled and sprawled, followed by the fairies and the sheep and the dogs. Then Kit understood. He jumped up, put his own pipe in the pocket of his smock, swung his tabor across his back and followed. He held in one hand the recorder and in the other his little crook. Oh yes, the ladder was all right, big and strong enough for Kit and shimmering with moonshine. The skylight too was wide open and quite as big as it ought to be. The ash leaves and boughs also he saw waving and full of dancing colors, but 10 times bigger than usual, though there was nothing very strange in this. Up the ladder of course he went and through the skylight, quite an ordinary and obvious thing to do after playing such a fairy pipe as the recorder, not to mention having made one himself good enough for Pigwidgeons. End of this chapter.